if this share screen works. How's that looking on your end, Chris?
Perfect.
Perfect? All right. So we're going to go through this. This is real exploration. I really like talking about this because I was once a college guide, kind of hoping to get into this industry, and a lot of things that I thought were real in exploration were not, and vice versa. There was a lot of work that I never thought existed that actually turned out to be some really great opportunities. So I like to share a little bit of the behind the scenes version of what exploration and the Nat Geo photographer kind of thing looks like. So the first example is, this is a great photo that I really enjoyed taking, but let's see if we can get the slide thing working. This is a lot of times what that actually looks like. The angle of a photo can really make something dramatic or fun all in the same moment. And what I really look forward to showing you guys is a little bit of what I've done, who I am, and then how you guys could maybe be involved in very similar things. And if you are interested in this career path, how you might be able to do it yourself. So again, my name is Chris Millbern. I've been a diver, photographer, explorer for a couple of years now. I feel very early career compared to a lot of the people that I work with, but I focused a lot of my career being underwater and working with cameras. So I've done films and photography, some exploratory stuff. I've been involved in cave diving, and I got my start a lot in underwater rescue and underwater medicine. And I've also been pretty involved in the technical diving community, working with, just about every type of underwater equipment you could possibly strap to your body. My passion is a little bit more wildlife photography. I really enjoy doing animal portraits. I have traveled to just about every continent at this point to do photography projects, and really try to capture the essence of an animal in a photo. It's a lot of fun for me and has brought me a lot of excitement. So like I said, I started out just like a lot of you might be in this room. I was a college guy with UCLA Outdoor Adventures, of which Chris Whitesides was also a member. And I know I saw Eric Hengesbaugh, who was actually a mentor to me in this program in a couple of ways. So I had a lot of fun doing that. And one of the things that I kind of want to talk about is how I got into things. So I started out doing this college guiding, and then I transitioned a little bit into medicine and biology. So I worked in biology labs, learning about science. I got my degree in ecology and evolutionary biology. I worked on an ambulance in Los Angeles for $9 an hour, and put in my hours trying to learn everything I could about useful, practical emergency medicine. And I ended up transitioning that into a job at the hyperbaric chamber at UCLA. So that is where you use pressure to treat different medical conditions. And usually it means putting scuba divers in a tank to help reacclimate their body if they've had injuries during scuba diving. If you guys have questions about that later, we can talk about it. That led me into scientific diving. So this kind of odd path got me into some opportunities where I got to work with scientists who were going underwater so that I could be a supportive role. And in being that support, I got to learn from the people who were being invited to do kind of more important jobs. So like the photographers or the head scientists. And I realized it was really nice being invited to these things, because that was a learning opportunity that I would never get if I tried to apply as a photographer, or if I was trying to be a head scientist. It would take me a lot of years to get my PhD in marine biology versus being somebody who found a useful niche that they could fill and then learn from the people who had already made it to the top. I continued developing a lot of my rescue and underwater medicine skills, working with fire departments and other organizations that did kind of search and rescue work. And eventually I got extremely lucky and got a scholarship that was offered through Rolex. So one of the things I encourage you guys, if you're interested in any underwater type work, is to apply to the Our World Underwater Scholarship Society. And we might be able to send out a link or something later, but this is a scholarship that Chris Whitesides actually helped me apply to and totally changed my life. They helped sponsor me for a year of travel, and that involved kind of diving and underwater medicine research, things like that. And it allowed me to meet with a lot of industry leaders that helped my career and kind of helped my network grow from there. So you guys should check that out. They have lots of scholarships, internships, things like that that are pretty not well known and have amazing opportunities attached to them. So through that scholarship, I got my first job working on a National Geographic expedition. But I was basically a guy who moved gear from point A to point B. So one thing I always try to remind people is, explorers don't tend to start at the top, they start at the bottom. And just like any other job, you kind of move the gear, and then maybe you fix the gear, and then maybe you use the gear, and eventually you're the guy that's being invited to take the photos. So for, this expedition, this was the accommodations that everybody was staying in the team. It was a really nice place in the Bahamas. This is on the island of Abaco, and there's some amazing underwater caves that are out there. And we were doing these cave diving, or I guess these cave dives that were there to survey how far the cave went and to find out what kind of species may have lived in there when the caves were dry, where the water sources were so that they could protect them for the local Bohemians, and understanding where sources of pollution might actually interact with the freshwater systems. So this is basically where I slept as opposed to everybody else, because my job was to sleep next to the gear and make sure that it didn't get stolen out in the forest while everybody else was in the really nice accommodations. And if anybody tells you that explorers do nothing but cool stuff, they're lying. You also have to do all of your expenses and receipts, even when you're living in the middle of the forest and being bit by mosquitoes. And a lot of times the guys that you're working for are pretty interesting, and you have to work really hard to accommodate every sort of person you could work with. But in getting those experiences where you're doing the hard work on the ground, on the last dive, I managed to take this photograph. And that was one of the moments that a guy that had been there on the expedition realized that I was pretty good at taking these photos too. And why I kind of share that story is because I think that a lot of people think that they can do these amazing jobs, but they don't provide useful skills, or they don't feel that they're worthy of the work that it takes to get noticed. And in a lot of ways, moving and schlepping the gear, sleeping out in the forest, that's the stuff that got me there. And it's only because I was in front of the right people that when I took a really amazing photograph, it got noticed. If I posted this to Instagram without any background caption, it's not really going to land me a job. There's lots of people that can take amazing photos. Since then, I've been working with lots of interesting imaging technologies, and have focused on doing both drone and 3D mapping terrestrially all over the world. So we've, my team and my company that I work for is called Virtual Wonders. And what we do is we try to preserve archaeological and natural cultural heritage sites in extremely fine detail. So we'll take 3D measurements, we'll take photographs, and we'll combine them into a 3D model that can be explored in real time, either in like virtual reality or through measurement software if you're an archaeologist, that allows for exploration without actually having to go to these really out of the way or very difficult to reach sites. The tools that I use are laser scanners. So this is a Leica laser scanner. What it does is it actually shoot out a laser at 2 million points per second, and it turns in a 360-degree arc, taking measurements of where every little piece of light touches. And in doing so, it creates a geometry that one can start to build a mesh of what a room, what a building, or sometimes even an entire city, the city of Chichen Itza in this example, will look like. And then once we get those 3D structures, we can start piecing together the exact textures and modeling that we want. So I'll show you guys a quick video of kind of what this looks like. So this is El Castillo. This is in the Yucatan Peninsula of Mexico. And inside of that pyramid that you just saw is this throne room. And you guys saw the photographs earlier. This throne room is actually now closed to the public. And there's all sorts of interesting archaeology that still exists all over this site. But it's also visited by lots of tourists. This is a UNESCO World Heritage Site. It's a hugely popular kind of wonder of the world. And because they get millions of visitors every year, they want to be able to track damage to the site. They want to track degradation from rain and the elements, and know if something were to happen, like let's say there's a big earthquake, if one of these structures collapsed, how can we rebuild it to be accurate both now and in the future? In terms of photographs, what I'll take, you saw I had the drone on Everest. What I was doing was actually for National Geographic, we were making a map of base camp, Everest Base Camp, and trying to track the human impact, because tons of earth is moved every year, and the glacier actually has been receding significantly every year. And so what I did is take thousands and thousands of photographs from all different angles using drones and just cameras on the ground to try to build a 3D structure that could be measured in the future. And all these photos are just slightly askew, and they allow different perspectives to kind of build out that 3D model. So you guys can see this is just a Google Images example, but one photograph is going to give you a 2D image of an object. Multiple photographs start to build out a 3D image of an object. And so my job is to take thousands and thousands and thousands of images wherever I can of these places that we're trying to protect. And when they're completed, they can look sometimes like this. So this is a 3D environment that my company Virtual Wonders just finished working on. And this is actually running in a virtual reality headset that you could explore and walk around in. This is in Palestine. It's called the Church of the Nativity. And the Church of the Nativity, if you're of that particular brand of faith, of Christianity, believes this is where Christ was born. And it's a hotly contested site that's very, very difficult to work in. But now people who could never travel to Palestine, who would never be able to make it either through the security issues or the political issues, can experience something like this in real time. And this is also a very threatened site. There's lots and lots of bomb threats and things like that that happen in these areas. And knowing that at any point in time, a piece of cultural history could be lost like this, we try really, really hard to protect it now, so if anything happens to it, we'd be able to view it in the future. Now, one of the things that I laugh about too is I try to specialize in creating 3D models of things that really shouldn't have 3D models made of them. One of the things that they'll tell you when you first get into what's called photogrammetry, which is taking all those different photos, or 3D modeling in general, is you don't do very complicated objects, you don't do very reflective objects, and you try your best to avoid large spaces that have lots of confusing perspectives. You can imagine why something like the Church of the Nativity here could be a little bit difficult when those are the rules that you have been given. And I like to think that I'm a little bit of a glutton for self-torture, because these are the challenges that I really enjoy taking on, and this is the work that I've chosen to do with my time. So if you guys have questions about 3D modeling or something, please feel free to shoot them out in the chat, but I'm going to move on to kind of why we're here today, which is how to be Indiana Jones in, what, my opinion, the time of Google Earth. So exploration and being an explorer is very different in name than what I think people imagine. You know, the Indiana Jones of flying to the far off destination and finding a new temple that nobody's ever found before. That's really not how it goes in a lot of ways today. The state of exploration today is that, you know, there's no more continents to stumble onto. But what that also means is planes exist. We can go to places that it used to take weeks, months, years to figure out ways to travel to in a matter of hours. And that opens up a lot of potential to find things where other people just haven't bothered to look. And I feel that people need to take advantage of the fact that, yeah, we can look up places very easily now, but that also gives us ideas of where we can start looking. The image in the background right now is actually a Google Earth image I just took on a whim of a place that is deep in the Amazon rainforest that has absolutely no roads, one river access, and probably is one of the most uninhabited places that still has human impact. You can see the 2 little huts there. I found that in 5 minutes, but now I'm curious what's there. And that could make for an amazing story. There could be lots of human kind of passion that exists in such a small locale that I would have never known existed if it wasn't for technology. Next is that science is really the new face of exploration. Education as a barrier is something that people struggle with. We all kind of want to just go out and do things. But the truth is that there's lots of specialists, there's lots of experts, and you're going to need to know what you're doing and how to translate it into a scientific realm if you're going to get funded as an explorer. You're not out there to just find things nowadays. You need to know what you're finding, why you think you're going to find it there, and then how you're going to turn around and use that to benefit the scientific knowledge base that exists for everybody else. And this is especially true when you're working with other countries. If they're going to allow you into their country to work commercially to try to find something, they're going to need the guarantee that you're doing it for a good purpose and not for personal gain. And lastly, I think it's very important to talk about that nobody has to call you an explorer to explore. I've been very lucky to work with National Geographic. I've been very lucky to work with BBC and a lot of other companies and channels and things like that. But ultimately, what they do is they're media companies, and they're looking for people who are already doing amazing work to then make a story around. There's only a very select few people that ever get brought stories or assignments anymore. It's almost all contractors, and it's almost all groups and organizations that exist outside of National Geographic or others that then get brought into the fold with some extra funding and media attention. But ultimately, we're doing what they were doing to begin with, well before they ever got noticed. And why I explain that is, if you want to work in this industry, or you just want to work with companies that are these big media companies, you need to do your own work first and kind of go with the intention of, I want to find something cool. I want to study a new behavior, find a new animal, do archaeological work in a place that hasn't gotten a lot of attention before. And then you're going to have to bring those stories to these media companies. If you try to pitch the idea of going and doing these things, you're going to have a big uphill battle in convincing them why you're the best person to do it. Whereas if you just go and do it, everybody's looking for a new story that sounds really cool. Everybody's looking for that new explorer on the block. So take advantage of that and do the work that you were hoping to do without needing to feel like somebody gives you license to do it. The next big tip that I give everybody is be useful. Almost nobody gets paid to do the cool stuff. You have to work on skills that are necessary and not fun. And what I mean by that is, my first job as a photographer was when I was already in the National Geographic fold as a medic, as a cook, as a guide, doing work that was much less fun and media, savvy, and had much less of the clout that like a photographer gets. And that's because I had enough skills that somebody wanted to invite me along to then get noticed as a photographer. So when you guys are talking about doing work, don't say, I want to be a photographer. Say, I want to get invited on an expedition and then take photos, because those are the people that are going to make it. So whatever your skill is, whether it be that you're an amazing cook, if you're an accountant, that can be extremely helpful on some of these larger expeditions. Logistics, medicine, even just understanding where things are. If you live in a certain area where you're more of an expert in your local area, whether that be the animals or the structures or the cultural history, all of that is something that gets you invited along. And then if you want to do the cool jobs on top of that, somebody will take you, because ultimately, if you can do 2 of these jobs, it saves the work of not only the people that would also be hired to do that additional job, but then the people who have to carry the extra food and deal with the extra logistics of having more and more people involved. You want to be a jack of all trades in this industry as much as you can be. And lastly, learn how to be your replacement. In the age of technology, you really need to understand where your job is going to eventually be replaced. So for me as a photographer, video is what was honestly replacing me before my career even got started. So I started working on video projects so that I knew when inevitably I wasn't going to get hired as a photographer, I'd also be useful in video. When video started getting so complicated, you know, extremely expensive and things, and people were looking more towards editors to fix things in post, I started to learn editing techniques so that I could be the kind of middleman that, yeah, I can take video, but I can also tell you why that video will work or not work for the 3D editors that are looking at it back at home. And because I'm not just going, oh, look, I'm not an editor, that's not my job, I'm more valuable because the editors know that I'm going to be thinking about their job in mind. And this can apply to a whole bunch of different things. If you're going to be a different job, think, okay, if you're going to be telemedicine instead of the medic that's going to be on the expedition, okay, how can you be better trained to deal with those phone calls? How can you be somebody that maybe works with a telemedicine company so you could be the one sent if there's a problem that happens? Always be thinking about how technology might replace you so that you can start to get trained in on that. And lastly, being the best at what you do won't matter if everybody hates spending time with you. I know a lot of amazing camera members, a lot of amazing explorers who are not very fun to share a tent with for a long time, share a boat with for a very long time. And they have missed out on opportunities because people go, yeah, we could have a slightly better picture, but if we're going to spend 3 weeks in a foreign country under stressful situations, we don't want to deal with them. And so being friendly and building a network of people that you can rely on to help you and you help them is going to get you a lot more work in this industry than being the best at one particular thing. And just to show you guys, I really did practice with video. You don't always have to be.
Boy,
oh, that's so loud.
My father.
But when I don't have photo assignments and stuff, I sometimes practice my video by doing like local commercials and, you know, kind of silly web videos for like a local financial planning office. Not everything is amazing exploration. You don't always have to be the Instagram star. It's okay to do work that pays so that you can buy equipment for the next job. That's kind of a point of pride that I think a lot of people stick to, is they try not to share their background stuff. But in reality, a lot of people do a lot of jobs on the side to make this work. It's not a high-paying career. Lastly, be stubborn. You need to be able to fall down, get back up, and kind of understand that if you can survive long enough to be an explorer, you're probably going to have already gained the skills necessary to be in a lot of these places. Be good at camping. Be good at just, you know, not having things be comfortable. This is when I actually fell off of Mount Whitney. Some of my guiding friends will remember this one. Definitely almost died, but I was back on Everest a couple of years later, not daunted, but more respectful of how to be safe in those kinds of environments. This is a photo that I always use. I tried to get into camera trapping. I really wanted to, like, you know, understand more about that world. And the first camera trap that I set up, this is in the DRC, Democratic Republic of the Congo in Africa. This guy came up and immediately kicked the lens of the camera and shattered it straight through the first photo that I went to take with said camera trap. And sometimes you just, you know, you take photos that don't work the way that you want them to. When I talk about being stubborn, it's also about understanding that you're going to be in conditions that are not always the most comfortable. So this is a time where I was trying to get a time lapse of weather out in the Grand Tetons in the national park out there, and it snowed a lot more than I was expecting, and this was actually my tent that I was staying out of for a couple of days. It's okay to not necessarily want this to be your brand of exploration, but just know that the more comfortable you are being uncomfortable, the more success you're going to have in these kinds of pursuits. People ask me a lot of times on Everest, like, how do you go to the bathroom? Well, this is the bathroom tent, and there's a hole in the rock floor that goes to a bucket, and that's where you go. But if you can survive that kind of condition, then you get to take some amazing videos and some amazing photos that really stick with you for a long time. This is actually a time lapse that I took on Everest of a storm that rolled in. And it's one of my favorites because you realize how high up Everest Base Camp is, because the clouds actually come from below. The clouds you see on top are the jet stream hitting the tops of the mountains. They're not standard clouds the way that you and I think about them. And you'll see the wave of cloud come in and coat the camp, and it gets very cold and very wet very quickly. This is in the span of maybe about 2.5 hours, I believe, before we were completely engulfed. But if you can survive storms like this, then you also get the opportunities to see some amazing things. The stars, Milky Way, things like that, they really stick with you. And if you guys have any questions about Everest, I'd be happy to answer them as well once we get through. Be humble. The age of the foreign conqueror is over. This is an important slide for me because I get very frustrated when a lot of people ask, like, oh, did you discover this? Did you discover that? There are amazing archaeologists and explorers in every country now. This is not something that the United States or Europe or, anybody has any claim over. Exploration is global, and you need to be able to work with the archaeologists and the scientists that are in these countries and respect their laws, respect their work if you're going to make it. And this is an archaeologist that I worked with, Guillermo de Anda in Mexico. He has put in decades of research in Mexico, and it's only because of his relationships with the Mexican government and their archaeologists that we were ever invited in to scan, to do 3D modeling of their archaeological sites. The same goes for Palestine. When I was working at, the birth of Christ, that's the special spot. Navigating Israeli and Palestinian politics is almost impossible, but we hired local photographers to do all of our extra 3D work. We worked very closely with those governments and made sure that we're giving both money back through our licensing and making sure that we give the proceeds and things to protecting these sites thereafter, so that they felt comfortable inviting us in, saying like, look, we know how to do things better. No, they have amazing photographers in Palestine, even though there's, gear restrictions and political restrictions. And to say that I'm better than anybody else that's there to be doing this work is not true. We might know a little bit more about how to do 3D scanning because that's what our company specializes in, but you should be looking to work with people who live anywhere you're going if you're going to be an explorer these days. Don't just rely on a team and then expect to go fix problems in a different country. A big example of this too is look for explorers. If you're going to follow people's work, follow photographers, follow these people that get branded by these media companies, look to see how they thank the people that are around them and the teams that they worked with on the ground. This is a photo that I was proud of because this is a Kordofan giraffe. This is an extremely rare species that only is got, I think, a little less than 20, 25 members of the species left in the DRC. And it's extremely difficult to find these guys. I could share this photo and say, wow, like this is an amazing, discovery and look what I found. But in reality, it's because of the work of people like these guys who put their life on the line every day out in the plains of the DRC to protect the national park in Garamba National Park. And these guys were nice enough to allow me to be involved with them and to follow them around for a short period of time and be in an area that they protect so that I could see that giraffe. Those giraffes wouldn't exist without the works of these guys. And for me to come back and share a photo without explaining who the people were that allowed me to take it, I think is not doing them a service. So to kind of summarize here, you want to find the overlap. Lots of people have useful skills. Lots of people are stubborn enough to get to these hard to reach places. And lots of people are humble enough to respect the rules, the local achievements. Very few people are all of these things. Even fewer you can stand sharing a tent with for over a month. So look to be that person that kind of encapsulates all of those things, and you may find yourself being an explorer as well. So I'll switch over to questions because I know I've already gone for 40 minutes here. So I really apologize, guys, for going so late. Chris, if you want to open up questions, if there are any, I can also kind of answer the the questions I get asked most. I've got some slides prepared because I've got a couple on deck, but just let me know.
Sweet. Well, thank you, Chris. That was awesome. It's impressive how, I mean, you're obviously super talented with these photos. It's cool seeing the transparency of the background work that you're doing. You're crazy humble because I see you're shaking your head even as I'm trying to list these accolades. But overall, the dedication is super impressive. And thanks for hanging out for questions.
No, thank you.
Feel free, if folks want to, type their questions in the chat. That's 100% all right. Otherwise, you're able to unmute yourself. We've got a super small room. It's just a few of us. So you can unmute yourself and ask that way. Otherwise, I've got a full laundry list of questions that and I know you hang out all the time, and I still got.
Yeah, if you guys want to turn on your video or something too and ask a question, this is obviously a little community here, so I'm just happy to talk.
Cool. So we've got our first question from Wendy. What was your favorite expedition?
Ooh, that's a great one. My favorite expedition would have to be Everest. That was one that was a large scale expedition. So 40 different scientists were flown out to be part of this entire summiting process, and everybody had their own specialty. And, you know, I feel very lucky when I get to work with the scientist that's the top of their field on one of their projects. This was like taking 40 of the best scientists in the world that all had their own specialty and all wanted to talk about it and putting them together in a camp for 5 straight weeks. So I would say Everest was my absolute favorite. But it's a close tie, man. There's a lot of good ones. If anybody gets a chance to go to Antarctica, that's also a top spot. And
favorite personal expedition, not working?
Ooh, not working. Oh, that one I've got a slide for. Cave diving is my favorite, like, personal kind of thing. So this isn't a place that I explored. This is a place that was shown to me and is well known in the cave diving community. But let's see if I can adjust the volume here a little bit. Take that down. So cave diving is a great kind of personal expedition for me. You really do feel like you're in a place that not very many people have gotten to be. And you feel like you're in an extreme environment because you are. This is a place actually that's in North Florida called Jug Hole, and these restrictions are something that you have to learn how to squeeze yourself through. Once you finish a dive like this, you feel like an accomplished explorer, that's for sure.
How many countries have you been to? And how many countries and one that you want to go that you haven't gone to?
I don't know what the count is, to be honest. Probably somewhere in the 20 to 30 range. And place that I haven't, I want to go to so many places. So many places. There's a lot of countries in Africa that I still really want to go to. Angola is a big one. I worked with a team that's called the Okavango River Project. There's these guys that travel through all these different rivers in Africa and take scientific measurements in places that really see no human impact. And they've just started working out of Angola to find source rivers, and that's a big one for me. I'd love to join them.
And if you could go back to one spot that you've already been to, where to?
Antarctica, absolutely. I'd live there if I wouldn't freeze to death. It is one of the coolest places you can go to, both literally and metaphorically, and a really beautiful spot to see wildlife that does not care that you're there.
Awesome. We've got another question. How do you overcome language barriers? Mm-hmm. And do you have difficulty finding interpreters?
No, you don't have difficulty finding interpreters. If you kind of do your research, there's lots of people who have made careers in every country, especially ones that kind of have exploration to offer, for being guides, and they know the travel companies, they know the restrictions. So everybody's kind of got what's called their fixer in a certain country. And if you contact people who have worked in those countries and say, hey, who did you work with and who did you like? It can be very easy to find people who are great to work with. The language barrier is always difficult, but people respect when you give their language a shot. I never travel to a country without learning a couple of phrases, without trying to understand the background of their country, their village, whatever the scale is. because when you show up and you just say, hey, I don't know what's going on, can you tell me? They're like, yeah, it's another one of these people. If you show up and you've got some phrases and you can help them help you, they're much more willing to go the extra mile.
That's awesome. Thank you, Chris.
Yeah.
Mr. Eric, did you have a question for us?
Oh, he's thinking about I see that mic being
there you go. Is that working?
Perfect. That works.
Yeah, it sounds like a lot of these trips require like a ton of collaboration, and it's not just like I think when people think exploration, it's like them alone on a peak somewhere, but it actually sounds like these are like huge team processes. And I guess I was wondering, what does that structure look like in the field? Like who all is out there and who's running the show, and what does it look to be like a good team member on an expedition like this?
Sure. So what I've found is to kind of expand on that question, it's almost, there's the team of people that's in the field, and then there's the team of people that usually stay at home but made it happen. You're totally right. Exploration is now a collaborative process where every government is aware of a lot of times what's in their country, and you need to be able to deal with, import tax laws. You need to be able to deal with like regulations and permitting for scientific samples. We had on Everest, like all sorts of troubles with even just like an ice core. That ice core did not leave with the scientific team because 4 of the permits were all of a sudden in like deep arguments, and visiting scientists had to like travel to the universities and then go to government officials. So really, to answer your question, the team structure is going to look like an expedition leader whose job it is to make sure housing, food, and equipment is, there on the ground where everybody else needs it. Then you're going to have somebody who's kind of in charge of using the equipment, somebody who's going to be in charge of safety. And other than that, the job just expands depending on what the scope is. But if you want to be a good team member, kind of like I said, you'll notice I didn't say, okay, and then there's somebody who cooks food, and then there's somebody who's responsible for X, Y, and Z. Everybody's responsible for that. A BBC shoot that I was on recently, the Emmy Award-winning head cinematographer, it was the cook. He was the one that made dinner for everybody every night, despite being the guy that outclassed all of us by a mile. People know that they need to be able to pull their weight in 16 different ways to be invited. And I think that that applies to the paperwork ahead of time too. So be ready for those who are looking to get into this thing to do a lot of work behind a computer before you ever make it out in the field. Let's see.
I got one for you, which is, what's your worst injury besides Mount Whitney? And then just, can you talk to the dangers of cave diving? It looks freaky.
Yeah. So, worst injury. I've been lucky not to have too many traumatic injuries besides that one. I kind of learned I didn't like it after that first one. I actually have a great little, let me see if I can find a set of slides here. We can go back to the shark diving if anybody's interested. So I was on a project that was out in the middle of nowhere, Alaska. So this is in the Bering Sea. It's called St. Paul Island, St. George Island. And this little island had some amazing like endemic species, but we were looking for king crabs as part of a larger like fisheries research project. And we were diving in these sites that nobody had ever been underwater before. And we were diving off of this state-of-the-art boat that had a captain that had to be captained by a local captain. The problem was this guy, super nice guy, not very experienced with divers in the water. Nobody had really been underwater in these areas. And when we were diving, the water was super cold and the current was super fast. And we got distracted a little bit with the creatures that we were seeing underwater. But when we came up, we realized we had drifted very, very far from the boat, and our captain did not bother to look for us. He just assumed that we could come up right next to the boat. Problem is, when there's a 4-mile-per-hour current that's taking you out to sea, and you don't bother to look for the divers that are coming up for like 20, 30, 40 minutes, they're now miles away and are basically a speck on the horizon, if that. So this guy realized after about a half hour after we were supposed to be up that we hadn't come up, and he picked a direction to start driving the boat because he knew that we were out of sight and he wouldn't be able to see us. And he ended up picking the right direction and found us. And one of my favorite little video clips that I've got is the, let me see if I can get back. This is the moment that we realized that the boat had found us. And we had been floating in the Bering Sea for about 30 minutes, going out to sea, thinking we were probably all going to die together.
Does it feel good to not be drifting into the ocean in Alaska?
And you can see, I mean, there's nothing for miles. It's just ocean as far as the eye can see. And we lost track of the boat 20 minutes ago. Oh, I lost it. But anyway, at the very end, she goes, I just can't tell my husband this story. And I think that's probably the first time that I've shared that little video clip, because it really goes to tell you, like, you can have problems, and exploration is not always the safest thing in the world, but every time you survive, you learn something new, and next time you bring a little GPS receiver with you.
All right, that segues good into the next question. With survival as your teacher, what are some maybe some pre-steps you can take to doing your own expedition, whether that's just traveling locally, traveling abroad? What are some basic tips? And then how do you work budgeting stuff?
Okay. On the travel tips, never bring something on an expedition that you haven't tested first. That's a big one. We see people all the time that, take their tent, take their GPS, take their, new watch, take their, cell phone app that totally has all the maps downloaded, those kinds of things that they haven't actually used before. And they go, oh, now that I have this, I can go do X, Y, and Z. If you don't test those things out beforehand, assume they don't work until proven otherwise. And it will get you out of a lot of trouble and a lot of frustration. Understand that physical maps and physical things that aren't battery powered are still very useful. Yes, you can put just about everything on your cell phone. Yes, you can have GPS and all these kinds of things. But if you're hiking across a river and you drop your cell phone, and that was your way to call emergency services, that was your way of tracking your maps and your progress, you're out of luck. And I try to encourage people to practice the skills that get them out of those situations often, and in places that you don't have opportunities to fix it otherwise. And I mean, there's a million little tips, right? But ultimately, to be safe, think through what's going to happen, think through what can happen, and assume the worst is going to happen and plan for that. It sounds cheesy, but the amount of times that I've been on a boat where somebody goes, oh, if somebody has a problem in the water, we'll just drive the boat to, the next safest spot, to the harbor, to wherever, except the boat doesn't have like a swim step, or it doesn't have any like way to kind of get in the water and out of the water easily. If somebody's unconscious in the water, they're very heavy. They're wearing scuba equipment. If you can't physically lift 200 pounds over a swim step, then you can't physically get that person back on the boat. And if you've planned for the ability to move people to the next spot with a boat, you need to also plan that you need to be able to lift them. That applies to everything. Backpacking. If you assume that you're going to call for help, make sure you have cell service. If you assume you're going to carry somebody out, how much weight can you carry? Or is your friend much bigger than you? Stuff like that can really help mitigate the kind of, I should have done this differently factors. Accounting, budgeting is very difficult. It's usually something where you try to set like a max budget and a projected budget and just work within those two. But the big one is knowing really what your daily expenses are. An expedition is something that can slide in the amount of days that you're out there very, very quickly. And if you think that you have enough money to do X, Y, Z in a set amount of time, break that down by day, how much food, room and board, rental equipment, whatever it is, and then expect that you're going to stay there for about 30% longer. That's a big one. The other one is understand what the country, if you're traveling to a different country, understand what laws there are for using equipment. if you have anything more than like a personal camera on you, there's a lot of governments that will stop you and make you pay lots of taxes or import duties, or just make you sign off that you're going to bring it out. But if you don't have the money right off the bat to pay, to say, yes, I will bring this back and get my money back, then you're sunk. So a lot of research ahead of time of like, hey, I'm traveling to this country to work. What does that look like?
I think that's great advice, because while you're applying it to your like super lofty top of the game stuff, I think that same stuff can be applied if we're going to go on our first camping trip. Kind of
Sure.
risk management was at the foundation, and then day-to-day budgeting of what you actually need while you're out there, kind of the planning and preparation.
Absolutely.
That's super
Absolutely.
Cool. We've got a fun question from David.
Yeah.
David, I'll butcher your last name. I'm super sorry. But it looks like you rode his bike through South America last year and filmed the whole thing, producing a documentary in the final stages. Any broad tips for the post-process or any pitfalls and ways that you've messed up?
Oh, so many. I would encourage.
You got way too excited.
I did, because I have gone through this process really twice. Like 2 times I've done such long-term projects that were so close to me that I then had to account for after the fact, that I do feel like I've got more than an hour's worth of tips that I could give that process. So I'd encourage David to reach out to me separately. I'd be happy to give more personalized tips. But the big one is going to be all of your footage, all of your ideas and stuff, meticulously organize it before you start that process, right? You need to understand every video clip you have, mark it by a name of like something that happens in the clip, put it in a category of like, this is the B-roll stuff that would just go in between if you're making a documentary. Make sure all of your audio and things are really cleaned up beforehand before you start the editing process, and then back everything up the way you want it organized before you start the kind of any of the video files and the projects and stuff. And why I say that is a lot of times we have our backups in a different organizational format than what we're currently working on. And if something were to happen during the video process that you're editing and you lose that first set, then you go to the backups and everything's labeled differently, you're sunk. I mean, you basically have to start over from scratch. But I'd be happy to talk on a more personal basis, just depending on where they are in the process. Because, it's a lot of work, but man, that's super exciting. Riding a bike across South America is what an adventure. I'm super impressed by that.
Let us know when it's in theaters too. I'm there.
Yeah.
I posted the outdoor adventure email address. We're wrapping up. I think we got one more question, but if you have additional questions after this, something's keeping you up late at night that you're thinking about, feel free to email that question on over and we'll get it to Explorer Chris. But we have one more question from Jenna. You spoke a little bit about virtual wonders. And you also talked about like all the benefits of kind of this new age documentation process. What's Virtual Wonders all about? What's their mission?
Yeah, so Virtual Wonders, our mission is to really protect the places that are threatened in a way that escapes their physical presence. So by 3D scanning a location, whether it's a cultural or archaeological place, we're about preserving it at millimeter or lower level detail. So really, really fine, scientifically color accurate, scientifically measurement accurate scans that mean that we could understand and study this site both from our houses and in the event that the site was destroyed. We also have a profit sharing program where we give a large share of the revenue that we make through our licensing back to nonprofits that help protect the sites, so that we're not just taking the digital data and running home with it. I think a big thing that places are just starting to catch on to is that if you 3D scan something, you kind of have that digital data to work with, and it's very hard for those sites, those countries, to monetize that later if somebody else already has the data for free. So what we try to do is we go in and we offer our services to kind of World Heritage sites and big protected monuments, so that we can scan the data in a way that they also have ownership over that digital data and can use it without feeling like somebody else is going to swoop in and take that opportunity. We also just work really hard to bring experiences to people. We've scanned like Washington, D.C. Memorials, Vietnam and Lincoln memorials, things like that, so that we can create 3D experiences where like veterans who can't travel, or in the COVID crisis, if nobody can go see something, but they want to visit these places, they can do so from the comfort of their own homes.
That's awesome. Seems like a super cool organization and cool team too, the more I hear about it. Well, we are right at the hour mark. I know we've taken a bunch of your time. We've worked Caitlin's fingers to the bone. So let's go ahead and call it there. Again, I'll post that email address, but please, please, please feel free to send any other questions, comments. Feel free to use that and we can get them to Chris. I want to say thank you all for joining and hanging out. I know I learned something. I hope everyone else learned something. Thank you, Caitlin. And then thank you, Chris Millbern, for taking time out of your day, for sharing your story and your tips. We appreciate the heck out of it.
Thank you guys, and thank you, Caitlin, for the translation. You guys have been awesome, and it was a pleasure. Super honored to be here.
Cool. We'll see everybody else here on Thursday at noon. We've got National Park Ranger Bethany, who's going to lead us on a virtual tour of Channel Islands. So we look forward to spending lunch with you then next time too. All right. Thank you again, everybody. And we'll see you later.
Thank you, guys.